Hello friends, today we will discuss about the community concept in ecology, and our main objectives will be to make the students understand the community concept, to make them know the difference between the community unit concept and the individualistic concept, to make the students familiar with Metacommunity concept, to make them comprehend the Metacommunity dynamics. So first and foremost, an introduction about the community concept. For almost as long as ecology has been a discipline, it has struggled to define what constitutes an ecological community. Alexander von Humboldt was the first to recommend to botanists the study of what he termed socially organized plant life. He was the first to call communities of plants associations. The classification of vegetation according to physiognomy was further developed by August Griesbach, who introduced a new vegetational term, formation. A group of plants which bears a definite physiognomic character, such as a meadow. As per Griesbach 1838 and Clements 1916, formation may be characterized by a single social species, by a complex of dominant species belonging to one family, or it may show an aggregate of species. Although of various taxonomic character, it is having a common peculiarity. For example, the alpine meadow consists almost exclusively of perennial herbs. Later, it became conventional that the term association referred to vegetation types characterized by floristic criteria, and the term formation referred to types characterized by physiognomy. According to Pavilad, 1935, an association is a plant community of definite floristic composition, presenting a uniform physiognomy and growing in uniform habitat conditions. Formations were, however, recognized as being internally heterogeneous due to the impact of topography and soil type upon the plant cover. Warming sought to correlate the distribution of vegetation with climatic and other physical parameters, holding that physiognomic growth forms stand in perfect harmony with the environment and that plants possess a peculiar inherent faculty by the exercise of which they directly adapt themselves to their surroundings. After discussing the historical background of community concept, now let us try to find out the difference between the community unit concept and the individualistic concept. The community unit concept versus the individualistic concept. A sharp dichotomy emerged early on, contrasting the view that communities were tightly integrated entities consisting of interdependent species, the community unit concept, versus the view that species co-occur largely according to the individualistic response of each species to spatially variable environmental conditions, the individualistic concept, also known as closed versus open community concept. The community unit concept. It was Frederick Clements who put forth the formal concept of a community as a coherent unit of study for ecologists. Clements 1916 considered the different species in a community as being tightly integrated and interdependent, much like the organs that make up a plant or animal, leading him to use the metaphor complex organism. So this concept is also called as organismic concept of community. To Clements, the primary unit of vegetation was the formation, which was large in area, encompassing much variation and including several regional associations. Formations were essentially physiognomic. Clements held as a matter of definition that the true dominants of any formation had all to be of the same life form, which was determined by the regional climate. The formation was thus defined as the climax community of an area over which the climate was effectively uniform. Thus, Clements credited the plant formation with a very high degree of internal integration, describing the formation as a complex or superorganism. The developmental study of vegetation rests upon the assumption that the unit or climax formation is an organic entity. As an organism, the formation arises, grows, matures and dies by the process of succession. Individual stands of climax vegetation were considered much like the constituent parts of an organism, equivalent of the tissues or cells of an individual. Thus, to Clements, whatever vegetation fell within an area of effectively uniform climate was of necessity all part of the formation and controlled by that climate. Within any given climate, only a single vegetation type could be regarded as true climax. This was the monoclinics theory. Contradictory to monoclinics theory was polyclinics theory. It was developed by Tansley. This theory considers that the climax vegetation of a region consists of not just one type but a mosaic of vegetational climaxes controlled by soil moisture, soil nutrients, topography, soil exposure, fire and animal activity. The principal unit of Clements' ecological system became the biotic community or biome, which comprised all the species of plants and animals at home in a particular habitat. To Clements, the biome formation was a highly organized entity with holistic and emergent characteristics. According to Clements and Shelford 1939, one of the first consequences of regarding succession as the key to vegetation was the realization that the community is more than the sum of its individual parts. It is indeed an organism of a new order. By emergent properties was meant those features of the whole that were not predictable from the study of its parts. Shelford also defined the community. Mutualism and co-evolution play an important role in the evolution of species that make up the association. Thus, the community has evolved as an integrated whole and species interactions are the glue holding it together. Individualistic concept. In contrast to Clements' organismal view of communities was the botanist H. A. Gleason's view of community. Gleason stressed the individualistic nature of species distribution. His view became known as the individualistic or continuum concept. The continuum concept states that the relationship among coexisting species within a community is due to similarities in their requirements and tolerances, not to strong interactions or common evolutionary history. In fact, Gleason concluded that change in species abundance along environmental gradients occurs so gradually that it is not practical to divide the vegetation or species into associations. Unlike Clements, Gleason asserted that species distributions along environmental gradients do not form clusters but represent the independent responses of species. According to him, transitions are gradual and difficult to identify. What we refer to as the community is merely the group of species found to coexist under any particular set of environmental conditions. The major difference between these two views is the importance of interactions in the structuring of communities. Now let us know about the concept of community based on internal interactions. It was Taylor, 1988, who suggests the cybernetic, that is self-regulating feedback system conception of the community. In describing this concept, Kending, 1961, asserts that a community is an aggregation of organisms which form a distinct ecological unit. According to him, major communities are those which together with their habitats form more or less complete and self-sustaining units and having an indispensable input of solar energy. Minor communities, societies, on the other hand, are secondary aggregations within a major community and are not therefore completely independent units as far as circulation of energy is concerned. The three interactive conceptions of the community that Caswell, 1976, distinguished were based on cybernetics, control theory and niche theory. Cybernetic concept is that in which the state variables of a system encode all the aspects of the system's history that are relevant to its development in the future, that is self-regulating entity. The control theoretic concept is that in which the dynamics of the system are a function of the system's current state and the environment, in which it finds itself expressed through the function f. The niche theoretic concept is that in which a species must find a room in the niche space of a community. The niche space is partly determined by abiotic features of environment, but a considerable part of it is defined by the other members of the community. Macfadyen's view, Macfadyen in 1963 extracted 5 potential properties of communities. These are co-occurrence of population, constancy of species composition leading to the recognition of community types, dynamic stability through feedback loops such that the normal species composition is restored when it has been upset, emergent properties in which the community exhibits characteristics not predictable from its constituents, and organismal properties or analogues in which the community is compared to organisms, integrated organismic units, with an ontogeny, that is succession, and a phlogeny, that is classification. Now let us understand the metacommunity concept. An ecological metacommunity is a set of interacting communities which are linked by the dispersal of multiple potentially interacting species. Populations in communities may be naturally patchily distributed due to variation in resources, physical gradients or biological characteristics. To understand the dynamics of this patchiness, Levin introduced the concept of metapopulations. In metapopulations, each subpopulation is unstable, subject to random extinction or recolonization. Only dispersal among patches assures long-term viability. Empty patches are susceptible to colonization. Thus, metapopulation or metacommunity concepts emphasize the interaction between space and time in ecological processes. Spatial processes such as long-distance dispersal play a crucial role in creating new populations. Temporal processes, including seed banks, may dominate dynamics at both local and regional scales. The relative importance of spatial versus temporal processes change as populations persist and communities assemble over time. These patterns may only emerge after many years. The mass effect, a mechanism for spatial dynamics in which there is net flow of individuals created by differences in population size in different paths, and the residue effect, a mechanism for spatial dynamics in which there is the prevention of local extinction of species by immigration, modify both species abundance and species interactions, and consequently both could affect community structure and dynamics. Source sink models describe a framework in which dispersal and environmental heterogeneity interact to determine local and regional abundance and composition. At the end of this lecture, let us learn something about metacommunity dynamics. The whole concept of the community related to patterns in the composition and diversity of species are influenced by only 4 classes of processes: selection, drift, speciation and dispersal. Selection represents deterministic fitness differences among species. Drift represents stochastic change in species abundance. Speciation creates new species, and dispersal is the movement of organisms across space. According to Hubble 2001, in a model with drift, speciation and dispersal but no selection, all community patterns are determined by the size of the local communities, the size of the entire metacommunity, and the rates of speciation and dispersal. Without input via speciation or dispersal from a separate metacommunity, all but one species will ultimately drift to extinction. According to Wright, 1940, in an island model with local drift but no speciation or selection, dispersal increases local diversity by countering drift and causes the similarity in composition among localities to increase. In a world of finite size, drift is a fact of life. It is an important process underlying community dynamics. According to the theory of island biogeography, large islands contain larger populations of component species, so the rate of extinction due to drift is lower than on smaller islands, thus leading to a greater number of species on large versus small islands. It is also possible that large islands provide a bigger target for dispersing organisms, such that the rate of immigration and therefore species richness is greater on large islands as compared to smaller ones. Thus drift, dispersal, selection and speciation can all explain or contribute to the species area relationship. So, dear students, this brings us to the end of the lecture on community concept. I hope you have understood it well. Have a nice day.